Iconic and controversial, admired and hated, hailed as a warrior and derided as a butcher. The complex legacy of former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon and the what-ifs had he achieved his vision for security and peace. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Stephen Cole. A full state funeral is being held for the former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, the politician and army general who became known as the bulldozer for his uncompromising attitude, died on Saturday. He was 85. He'd been in a coma since suffering a stroke at the peak of his political career in 2006. Thousands of Israelis have been paying their last respects as Ariel Sharon's body lies in state outside the Israeli parliament in Jerusalem. His life was closely intertwined with Israel's history, reflecting the complex link between security, peace and politics. But he was also punctuated by both stunning victories and disastrous mistakes, as Mike Hanna reports.
It was a moment that defined the nature of the man. In a walk across the sacred grounds of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Ariel Sharon demonstrated his belief that Israel had sovereignty over all of Jerusalem. It was an action that sparked off the second Palestinian uprising and resulted in Sharon becoming prime minister in a matter of months. His willingness to take risks was always legendary. Regarded as a maverick by his military superiors, Sharon continually produced the results that defied criticism, and his military career was marked by a series of audacious campaigns and victories. After years in the field, he was appointed defense minister, and in 1982 he sent Israeli forces into Lebanon, forces that stood by and did nothing, while Phalangist fighters killed some 2,000 people in the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps. It should have been the end of Sharon's political career. An Israeli commission of inquiry found him indirectly responsible and recommended that he never hold public office again. It was a recommendation that Sharon typically ignored, winning first the contest against Benjamin Netanyahu for the leadership of the Likud party, and then after his walk at Al-Aqsa, storming to a general election victory. He promised the country security and took a long-term view. While a wave of suicide bomb attacks hit Israel, Sharon ramped up a process in which hundreds of thousands of immigrants from the former Soviet bloc countries were granted Israeli citizenship. And he ordered the construction of a separation barrier. Its success from a security point of view disputed, but at the same time it physically redefined what Israel regarded as its borders. Sharon had always been an advocate of Israeli settlement in what he called Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and his years in office were marked by a steady increase in the number of settlers. At the same time, he determined the settlements in Gaza were not in Israel's strategic interest, and in 2005 he ordered the settlers be removed. He had no qualms about physically removing settlers from the Sinai decades before, a mark of his fundamental Zionist belief that no claim should be made on land that was not regarded as Israel. And part of this Zionism, Sharon's view that his lifetime enemy Yasser Arafat did not threaten his religion, but his country. It was a hostile relationship that had a deeply personal content. Sharon had fought against Yasser Arafat's forces in Lebanon, eventually driving the Palestinian leader out of that country. And as prime minister, with the backing of the US president, he sought to exile Arafat from his own people, in the final stages even knocking down the walls of the compound that he would not allow Arafat to leave. His health deteriorating, Arafat left his shattered headquarters in Ramallah and once again went into exile. This time not to return. Sharon had won again. But the victory was short-lived. As Sharon was preparing for yet another election, he suffered a massive stroke and never regained consciousness. After years of lying in a coma, this proudly Zionist general, who'd been on the front line of so many battles, suffered his final defeat. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera.
So, how would Ariel Sharon have shaped current events had he stayed in office? And what effect would he have on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Just two questions, but there are many others to ask my guests. In Jerusalem, we have Yoaz Hendel, head of the Institute for Zionist Strategies and former director of communications for the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Joining us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank is Ghassan Khatib, a professor at Birzeit University and former Palestinian minister. And in our London studio is Ian Black, Middle East editor for The Guardian newspaper. So let's go first to London and Ian Black. Sharon practiced the so-called Iron Wall school of Zionism and was always distrustful of Arabs. Was he as one-dimensional as that?
I think that's a fair summary of where he stood in relation to the conflict between the Zionist movement, Israel, and the Arabs, which was going on throughout his entire life. His background, as everybody knows, was in the military. It was as a military man that he made his mark. He was suspicious of the Palestinians, of Arabs, in his dealings with them in the realm of diplomacy and politics. He leaves one tantalizing and, of course, inevitably unanswered question as to whether, had he lived, instead of suffering his stroke in 2005, he would have gone on to make pragmatic concessions, sufficient concessions in the West Bank to follow on from his unilateral withdrawal from Gaza. And I think myself, and this is a matter for discussion, for debate, and speculation, of course, that the evidence that we have about how he lived his life and what he did was that he was not actually the warrior turned peacemaker, except in a narrow sense of wanting to settle the conflict on Israel's terms.
So a loose title, peacemaker stroke warrior. Yoaz Hendel, how will Sharon be remembered in Israel? Warrior statesman or a bit of both?
Well, I think that I will agree with Ian. Sharon was pragmatic more than a peacemaker. He was a warrior, and he understood that it's impossible to live in a utopic neighborhood and in a utopic reality, and almost impossible to sign a final agreement with the Palestinians which will solve all the conflict between us and the Palestinians. He didn't believe the Palestinians. He believed in the rights of the Jewish people to have their own land in Israel, and he also believed in the right to compromise if he needs to. Now, what he did in Gaza Strip was a very pragmatic solution to a situation when you have a minority of Jews in an area which you have many Palestinians, and he took this decision, very hard decision for him, especially after his long route with the settlers, and he took it. And I'm not sure that after the results that we saw for the last 8 years, and after the results that he saw for the last years that he was still in conscience, he would take other steps in order to make some kind of pragmatic solutions while the Hamas is getting control and there is a rain of rockets via Israel. You know, we can never know, but I think that Sharon was, if you can determine in one word, he was the most pragmatic Israeli and the most Zionistic Israel, and he believed in the Zionistic idea, and he believed that if you want to survive and to maintain and to strengthen Israel, you need to be pragmatic in this neighborhood.
Okay, pragmatic, that word coming up again. Ghassan Khatib, Palestinians have a completely different view of Sharon. He's seen as someone with Palestinian blood on his hands and who should stand trial at the ICC. Is that the commonly held view by all Palestinians?
That's the consensus among all Palestinians, with almost no exception. Palestinians perceive Sharon on one hand as a war criminal because he worked on achieving his objectives in brutal ways that tantamount to war crimes, sometimes even in the Israeli criteria. But second, politically speaking, Sharon during all his political life as a bold representative of the political school of thoughts in Israel that believe in maintaining the Israeli control over as much as possible of the Palestinian occupied territories. And as such, he was a strong opposition leader to the peace process and to the Oslo Agreement, and the party that he led voted, of course, against the Oslo Agreement, and when he became in power, he actually destroyed the agreement to a large extent. So that's the kind of memory Palestinians have for him. And fortunately, that's not only the Palestinians. I think that this is more or less worldwide impression about Sharon and his atrocities.
Okay, Ian Black, when you look at the reprisal raids against Jordan and Egypt, the 1968 war, Sabra and Shatila, the siege of Beirut, and then he had a change of heart and became the peacemaker for some, but again, you would perhaps say he was being pragmatic because he turned more towards peace.
Well, I think that Sharon's military record speaks for itself. It's well known. As a young man, he fought in the War of 1948. He was then associated, in command indeed, of a famous atrocity in 1953, one of those retaliation raids that Israel mounted in that period against Palestinian attacks across the border. He was famous for being daring and insubordinate in the army. He was lucky. He wasn't lucky when, as defense minister, of course, in 1982, the allies that he had forged a relationship with, the Christian forces in Lebanon, went on to massacre hundreds of Palestinians. He was blamed for that and declared unfit by an Israeli commission for public office. He displayed pragmatism, it is true. I myself see him as having been consistent through his long career, not trusting the Arabs, not accepting the idea of a Palestinian people, and not being prepared in a fundamental sense to compromise over the conflict in this small country between the two peoples who claim it. He maintained military superiority throughout and was prepared in his final days as an active politician to do something pragmatic whose consequences we cannot know. But as I've said, I think it's possible to speculate intelligently that he was not the peacemaker that some people like to portray him as.
All right, Yoaz, if he's not the accepted peacemaker for some, what kind of battlefield general was he? Because he was very much a soldier at heart, wasn't he? He was often accused too of using bloody and brutal means to achieve his goals.
First of all, he was a soldier and a general who did what he needed to do in order to protect Israel. And I would like another remark. I heard my Palestinian colleague who blamed Sharon for many difficulties that the Palestinians had in the past and others. I think that if you want to study from history, you need to have some kind of perspective. And I think that today we have a perspective about what happened in Sabra and Shatila. When you see what's happening in Syria and what's happening in this neighborhood, you understand it's not easy, even if you are a big general. Now, I think that Sharon had a few mistakes when he thought that he can handle domestic problems in Lebanon and in other places. At the end of the day, the Israelis, it's hard enough to make sure that we are safe here in Israel, and it's much difficult to make sure what's happening in other places. And I think that Sharon understood this lesson as general. He made his battles. There are battles from '67 that still in military academics study it. And he was a great general. He was a great warrior, and he was as politician. He had better aspects and less impressive aspects. But at the end of the day, he was mainly someone that took care for his own people and for his own country. And I think that what he have done, and you know, there are a lot of debates in Israel about the disengagement from Gaza. Everything that he has done was part of his own Zionistic view in order to strengthen Israel.
Khatib, would it be fair to say, moving away from the battlefield now, that Sharon shaped or helped shape, or was the main driver of shaping the current situation where we are at the moment on the West Bank and Israeli relations with the Palestinians, more so than any other Israeli politician?
I think Sharon must be blamed for contributing significantly to destroying the prospects of making peace, because Sharon never believed in what almost all the international community believe in, which is that ending the conflict would require ending the Israeli occupation in order to allow for the establishment of a Palestinian state. Sharon stands for the opposite. Sharon stands for maintaining the Israeli illegal occupation in the Palestinian territories. And the difference between him and other right-wing leaders is that he wouldn't hesitate in pursuing massacres or war crimes in order to achieve such political objective. So he might be a soldier, but that doesn't tell a lot, because there are good soldiers and there are bad soldiers, and I think Sharon was a bad soldier in the moral sense and in the criteria of war and peace in this conflict. Even his withdrawal from Gaza, his redeployment from Gaza and dismantling illegal Israeli settlements in Gaza was done in the worst possible context. Number one, he justified that by saying at the time that he's doing that in order to consolidate the settlements in the West Bank and to consolidate the Israeli control in the West Bank. And number two, he did it in a way that disregarded the Palestinian leadership and the peace process, and in a way that played to the hand of Hamas. Actually, he gave Gaza to Hamas.
Right. Well, I want to come back to this point, but I want to get more reaction to Ariel Sharon's death. Not surprisingly, the reaction has been divided. Glowing praise